Shabbat Shalom. The current lease on the house that Lindsay and I rent expires at the end of July. And until this week, we had not heard from the property management company about a renewal. Usually, this is taken care of sometime in March or April. But the scheduling of our annual home safety inspection was delayed a few times. There were some holidays. Until this Monday, when we had our safety inspection. So the renewal process has been delayed, and we've been a little bit anxious. Where are we? Looking at Zillow. What are the rents around this area? Where could we possibly live? How are we going to move all our stuff? Anxiety. And then we got this email on Tuesday, the day after the inspection, and it read, "We'd like to thank you for doing a great job in keeping the property in great condition, limiting any wear and tear. This is great news because this report will be used as a positive reference when the move-out occurs." Now we're really anxious. I'm a rabbi, Lindsay's a comparative literature major. We are trained to read the meaning of a text very closely. So we wonder, does this imply that there's not going to be a renewal? Or is this the standard wording in their reports? I looked back at some of our old emails from the years before, and fortunately, similar language had been used in previous years. But still, until we got the final message saying that the owner had decided to extend our lease for another year, which we got on Thursday, we were carrying some tension with us. But I'm happy to say on Thursday we did sign this extension, and God willing, we will be in our current home until at least July 2025. Stressful week. But of all the weeks for this to happen, the week of Parashat Behar actually seems to be fairly appropriate. Because this Parsha is all about setting up a just economic system based on how land is owned. And ultimately, land isn't owned. It's temporarily leased. It's a system that provides a stopgap, preventing people from becoming trapped in a perpetual cycle of poverty. After 50 years, land returns to its original owners. So it is impossible for anyone or any family to accumulate too much wealth, which was primarily land, compared to their fellows. Because any land they acquire is only temporary. After 50 years, it's back to the original owners. And all of this, this whole system is undergirded by the fact that ultimately the land belongs to God. Just before the triennial reading, in Leviticus 25:23, God says, "The land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me." This phrase is really interesting, strangers resident. In the Hebrew, gerim v'toshavim. It's a phrase, probably actually a single compound noun idea. This happens sometimes in Hebrew. You have two nouns combined with the vav, which means and, which means one single unit. But the two words are gerim, strangers, and toshavim, dwellers. It's a bit unusual of a phrase. A stranger and a dweller. A stranger implies alienation, while a dweller is connected to the place where they're dwelling. In other places, it's translated, in fact, later in our Parsha, this phrase, gerim v'toshavim, is translated as resident aliens, meaning non-Jews who are living in the land with us. And when it's used that way, in this week's Parsha and in other places in the Torah, it's used to make a distinction between the children of Israel, the Israelites, and these other people, the Gerim Toshavim. And in this week's Parsha, that distinction is clear when it comes to the laws of slavery and indentured servitude. Israelites cannot become permanent slaves to other Israelites or to resident aliens. And the resident alien, while they may be able to temporarily own an Israelite, must always allow them to be redeemed. Unlike slaves from among the resident aliens who can be owned in perpetuity. These distinctions between the rights of Jews and non-Jews should hopefully trouble us. And the Parsha ultimately, I believe, undercuts these distinctions in the verse we quoted above. Because all of us are ultimately gerim v'toshavim, with God. We may dwell in a place, but we are reminded that none of this is permanent. All of it is a temporary lease. We do not own land. Ultimately, we are strangers. And from this understanding that we are strangers comes the obligation to treat each other justly, to set up a system of justice. The early Hasidic work, the Degel Machane Ephraim, which, if you're paying attention the last couple of weeks, you may recall Rabbi Kunin has quoted on several occasions. It's because the text is the one we're studying in our weekly rabbi study group. The Degel Machane Ephraim talks about what it means to be a ger, what it means to be a stranger. And he writes, "A stranger is without a people to cleave to. They are without a fellow to be close to, and to tell all that happens to them, and all that is in their heart, since they have no friend, neither Jew nor Gentile. But when the stranger sees a friend, then they tell all of this to their friend, all their happenings." The stranger is in a state of alienation, with no one to share their story with no one to share their heart with. But this makes them open. So when they come across another stranger, that stranger is a friend. They have someone to share their story, to share their heart. This teaching really resonated with me when I learned it this week. But then the Degel takes it one step further. So remember the verse, "You are but strangers resident with me." With me. Imadi, with me. So the Degel concludes from this, "The Holy Blessed One is like a stranger in this world, for God has no one with whom to imbibe God's presence and glory." So God is a stranger. With us, God is looking for connection. How do we make this connection? The Degel quotes Psalm 119:19, where the psalmist, traditionally ascribed to be King David, writes, "I am only a stranger in this land. Do not hide your commandments from me." The commandments are the way God shares God's heart with us. So we all, strangers in the land, have a friend to connect with. I think it's a powerful message, but at first might seem counterintuitive. When we open up to our alienation, to our foreignness, that is when we are able to authentically connect with others and with God. So a little earlier when I gave the Torah summary, before the reading, I asked for people to consider the exceptions to the rules of the Yovel. Did anyone find what is the exception to the rule of the Yovel? What is the land that is not released back to original owners after the 50-year period? Marty? The Levites is the exception to the exception. We'll get there in a second. What land is not returned after 50 years? Wendy?
A home in a walled city.
A home in a walled city. The Levites had cities, and their homes would go back to them. But in general, if you were in a walled city and you sold a house, that house would not go back to the original owners at the end of the Yovel. You get to keep that house. Within walled cities, these rules do not apply. The society in which this was written was originally agrarian. Cities had some kind of exempt state. I don't really know exactly why the Torah is necessarily teaching this originally. But what I think, taking it spiritually, when we build walls, literal or metaphorical, we think maybe we've somehow overcome our status as Gerim Toshavim. Maybe in a sense we have. Maybe this is a place we can feel permanent, we can feel connected, we can feel. Houses in the walled city, therefore, can be bought and owned permanently. This is my house. It will go to my children and my children's children, my children's children, until they eventually sell it. The Yovel cycle has nothing to do with this. If you want to buy a field, that's not the case. After 50 years, it goes back to the original owners. But there's a cost. It cuts us off from the land. It cuts us off from each other. And perhaps it cuts us off from God. The Parsha ends with a warning against committing idolatry. And while this may seem like the start of a new theme, if you want an elaboration on that, you can check out the Shabbat email I wrote earlier that came out on Friday. But I believe they're intrinsically connected. When we think we can truly own stuff, we think we can truly own land. The land is ours, and not we are the land. When we have that attitude, the land is ours, the sin of idolatry is not too far away. So I want to challenge us. How can we let go of walls that we build around us? How can we open ourselves up to the uncertainties, the danger, the anxiety that comes with being strangers? Because in the end, that's what we are. And when we can acknowledge it, when we can dwell in the discomfort of being strangers, when we can really be Gerim v'Toshavim, then we are open to connections with each other and with God. So let's build those connections together. Shabbat Shalom. We'll be